This is Mike, and welcome to episode number 192 of the EcomCrew podcast. You can go to ecomcrew.com/192 to get to the show notes for this episode. Leave any comments or thoughts you might have. And I think this is one that, at least I'm hoping, that we'll get a lot of audience participation on and some interaction on, because I think all of us suffer from the topic that we're talking about today, which is stress due to an e-commerce business, stress-induced e-commerce or something like that. So Dave and I go through a list of things that provide stress for us or cause stress for us in our e-commerce businesses. And I think that there isn't any business that I've ever been involved in the 15 to 20 years I've been doing entrepreneurship and running businesses. But the stresses that come from e-commerce are unique. There isn't inventory in an affiliate model or in a consulting model, which I had done before. And Amazon's a big factor, obviously, in e-commerce and things of that nature. So we talk about these things and the types of things you can do to help cope with that, because I think it's important to deal with it the best that you can. And the things that are out of your control, realize what those are and kind of go with the punches. So before getting into this episode, just want to remind you can go to ecomcrew.com/free if you haven't already, and sign up for our free mini courses. No credit card required, no gimmicks or anything like that. Just a few free mini courses. They're really helpful in different areas, from Amazon to importing to building a seven-figure brand. We got a couple really good courses there that are free. This is the same model that we've used for Color It and for Tactical and our other e-commerce brands that build seven-figure e-commerce brands, where we provide value first. The podcast does that, the mini courses do that, and other things that we do give you guys value first. So when you're at a time when you're looking for help and guidance in your e-commerce journey, when you're ready, EcomCrew Premium is there for you. And if not, then obviously we still love doing this stuff anyway. It's been a lot of fun and rewarding. So go over to ecomcrew.com/free to sign up for that if you haven't. And if you have, well, then just hit play here and let the rest of this episode go, and we'll be back with our stress-induced e-commerce episode right on the other side of this intro.
Welcome to the EcomCrew podcast, hosted by Mike Jackness and Dave Bryant, who together run e-commerce businesses that generate 8 figures annually. Mike and Dave take pride in running a podcast that isn't just fluff, talking about specific products, problems, and real-world solutions. In the words of one of our favorite reviews, this podcast is like a playbook for e-commerce. You can take any episode and spend the next month trying to implement it. So without further ado, here's the EcomCrew.
This is Mike.
This is Dave.
And welcome to this edition of the EcomCrew podcast. How's it going, Dave?
Going well. We were just admiring my teeth off camera.
It sucks for me because I'm going to have like one less thing to give you a hard time about.
The backstory is that I got Invisalign a few months ago to correct my terrible Canadian teeth, and Mike is now feeling a little bit of envy at not having nearly as pretty teeth as me.
It's true. I'm going to have to... I have like straight top teeth, but the bottom ones could probably use an Invisalign.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen those, actually.
Well, I smile with my front teeth or top teeth, I guess. I don't know. What it is.
Strategic smiler.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I've adapted to that. It's actually not that bad. They're pretty. And I never had braces or anything as a kid. It's somehow just I get pretty lucky.
Yeah, you just got to work on the hair now.
Yeah. To dip myself in an acid bath. I'm guessing that's not what we're here to talk about today, though.
Somewhat. We're talking about stress in e-commerce, and no, hairlines and crooked teeth do not relate to the stress of e-commerce. It's pretty much everything else.
Yeah. So I thought this would be an interesting episode to do, because we're talking about this stuff all the time privately, and a lot of our EcomCrew premium members are talking to us about it through email or in the webinars that we do. So I think everyone feels it, but it's the thing. It's like one of these things that no one ever wants to talk about or like really admit. Although I don't quite understand that. Like, I've always been pretty open about everything, and I think that's one of the things that makes this podcast unique. And I thought it would be an interesting episode to just to have a pretty open discussion about stress in our lives that is produced by this business.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it really strikes home right now. I was talking to actually 2 friends over the weekend, and 2 of them are very different businesses, but kind of going through similar cycles. One was actually one of my first e-commerce friends, and he basically messaged me the other day and asking if he thought he could sell his business. And he told me the story about how 2014, the business had revenues of about $1.5 million. The next year it was $750,000. And flash forward all the way up to this year, and it had gone from $1.5 million a year in revenue to about $55,000 in revenue. Wow. And things have just gotten to the point now where he's unfortunately having to declare personal bankruptcy.
Man, that's brutal. That's like the ultimate nightmare, I think, of all entrepreneurs, right? Is because it can happen. It happens so quickly, and it's like trying to catch a falling knife when you're in that situation, because you're so emotionally attached to the business that it's hard to let go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the problem, is all of a sudden the ship starts kind of going awry, and it's hard to kind of redirect the ship in that direction that it's naturally going. And instead you want to keep going for that mammoth growth and get back to where it was and continue that 50% growth that you were experiencing the year before, rather than, I guess, kind of realize, okay, well, maybe things have just kind of changed and we need to adapt for that. And it's really hard to adapt as a business when your business does start to take that slowdown.
Yep, no doubt. All right, so let's talk about, you and me, the stresses that we feel. We can kind of just go back and forth. I have a list of things of stress point producers for me. And I know that you've had some as well. So let's kind of just go down the list and talk about them so people can relate to these things.
Sure.
You go first.
Oh, I go first.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, and I'll kind of tie this point into a personal story, is inventory is the biggest one. And for the dropshippers out there, they're fortunate they don't have to worry about this. But for inventory-based companies like us, and for me, of course, personally, that's definitely been the biggest stress-inducing point. And going back to me when in 2014, I realized at a point that, hey, I basically have all my personal assets tied up in inventory. And so if I go through a little bit of a downturn like my friend did, not only am I going to lose my business, I'm going to lose everything basically that I've worked for in my life. It's going to be gone. And that just made me lose an incredible amount of sleep at night, thinking, geez, what could happen here if things go awry? And it's one thing when you're some 22-year-old kid in university, and okay, well, if you lose all your money, it's not really a big deal. But when you're starting to form a young family and looking after a kid and people dependent on you, it's really a very stressful moment. Yeah,
no doubt about it. And for us, I was just as you were talking about that, I pulled up our inventory report here. We have $1,006,770 in inventory, and that doesn't count stuff that's on the water or things we've already put a deposit on. So it's probably more like 1.2. And the inventory itself isn't the stress point. It's the number. When the number exceeds a comfort level is, I think, where the stress comes in. Because when we first got started, the inventory was almost like an exciting thing, right? It's like, ooh, I bought this stuff. I have these things, and I'm gonna like turn the inventory and make money with them. And everyone's at a different point in their life. I mean, when we got into it, we already had success with another business, and we put in a couple of $100,000 into inventory pretty quickly. And I felt very comfortable with that. It was one of these things where it made a lot of sense in our life, and it was an amount of money. Had we lost all of it, wouldn't really change the trajectory of our life one way or the other. But $1 million is a different story, and that kind of just happens over time with the growth of an e-commerce business. Before you know it, you're at a point where that number is uncomfortable. And again, that number is going to be different for everyone. If you're a private equity firm or a much larger conglomerate, $1 million in inventory is nothing. But for me, it's a big number, and it definitely, like having that number here, like looking at this, it's a number that we look at all the time, is definitely a stress point for me.
So what do you think is the magic number, the percent of your assets that you would feel comfortable having tied up in inventory?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, we're way past that number. So whatever it is, we have definitely passed that mark. I don't know. It's maybe 20% or something, or of liquid net worth. I don't know exactly. But we're definitely past it. It's definitely one of these things where it just, because I can't pay my bills with gel pens. The taxman doesn't accept gel pens. My mortgage company doesn't accept gel pens. We don't have a lot of other expenses. We're pretty lucky that that's one thing that we don't have stress in our lives, is we don't have to worry about things like that. But it's still a big number, and you just, in the back of your mind, I think every business owner always worries about when the poop hits the fan, like the worst case scenario. Like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, well, I don't know, like Amazon suspends your account, or nobody wants coloring supplies anymore. I don't know, like whatever, the business just goes like completely out of business for whatever reason, and now you've got $1 million in inventory that you can't liquidate. So it's definitely a stress, right? I mean, that's definitely something that is always on my mind.
Yeah, and that's something I've learned. Having a cash event and basically taking all my money off the table is that going forward, I am being very conscious of not having more money on the table than I'm prepared to lose. And for me, I would say that money is more like 25% of liquid net assets. And so I'm now at the point where I'm very cognizant of that number, because it's creeping up and up and up. And I want it to be at a point where if the worst case scenario happened, yeah, it's going to suck and it's going to be a bad day, but it's not going to totally alter my life or my family's life. And that's been one takeaway, I think, is I've kind of grown as an entrepreneur, is to realize don't have more on the table than you're prepared to lose, because otherwise you are going to lose stress over it. And that's not good for a lot of reasons. Most importantly, because it takes a toll on your life and your health.
I don't think you're a real entrepreneur because you're not willing to go like way past the point of no return like I have.
I was well beyond that point. I've lived.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next the next thing on the list here, which is a suspension. We kind of alluded to this as I was talking about inventory in that worst case scenario thing, but I definitely, a stress point for me is Amazon as a stress point, because Amazon has become a disproportional large part of our business. It's something that I don't like. It's one of these things where I know better, and from just having other businesses in the past, that it's not a situation that I particularly want to be in, but it's one that I can't change. I mean, I can't change Amazon's growth trajectory and how important they are to e-commerce. I mean, it becomes a situation of like, do you just not sell there at all and have a much smaller business, or do you take just kind of take the way things are going in stride? And that's just the way that we've done it. But it is definitely a stress point, knowing that at any moment I could wake up and have that email of, you're no longer allowed to sell on Amazon.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, where a lot of people have multiple secret Amazon accounts. And it's something that I've even played with the idea of even buying a secondary business that has a whole separate business identity and basically no ties to me, and buying it simply for the sake of having a secondary Amazon account that's not tied to me in any way, that I could offload one business's inventory onto if things ever did hit the fan.
Yep. Okay, what's the next one for you?
Next thing for me is staff. And I think that's one that growing companies start to experience, is you start to hire people and they become reliant on you for a job and for a paycheck. It's almost like with a family, where, how I talked about before, I have the stress of, if my business goes under, my family is depending on me. And it's the same thing with your staff. They're depending on you to pay their paychecks. And if your business goes under, you're going to basically have to let all those people go. And it's something I went through in my previous company. We had a bad year, basically had to not let people go, but basically reduce their hours. They were great enough to accept those reduced hours, thankfully. But it's something we went through, and that was a hard conversation to have with them. So as a growing company, that's definitely one of the biggest worries.
Yeah, and that is on my list as well. So I want to just take a minute to talk about it myself. I mean, for me, it's actually pretty high up on the list, because I'm just such a people person, and I've been in business long enough, again, that I've had to lay off people, I've had to fire people, and there's only been like one or two people out of the hundreds that I've worked with over the years that I've enjoyed firing. Those like someone that's like stealing, or just something like along those lines, where it's just egregious. You're just like, it feels good to like kick them out the door. But besides that, even someone doing we had to fire someone earlier this year here in this office that just wasn't doing a good job. But he's like a good guy, right? And it just it just sucks. It's like, I mean, you know, they still depend on you for the job, and you know, especially when they're begging to like be able to keep their job, and it just like it's an emotional. I mean, it's tough. And we let some people go in the Philippines earlier this year that weren't doing a good job, and you know that's also difficult. Again, they weren't doing a good job, but it's still like they're people that you've hung out with and really enjoy them as a person. Like they'd be your friend outside of the office, but you can't really mix those two things. It's like that doesn't go together, and it makes it very difficult. And then like how does the rest of the team like handle that on top of it? Like, so you gotta like think of all those things. Like, you know, it's like they don't know because it's obviously personal. Like you don't disclose like when someone has a bad performance report like to the whole team, and like, you know, Johnny was like doing a really bad job, like we're going to post him, you know, and shame him, right? So it's just like sometimes when these people get fired, they're like the other people on the team are taken aback by it because they didn't realize that they weren't doing a good job. So there's like all these stress points that come into having employees.
Well, and I was going to say that, yeah, it's stressful firing people, but when you fire somebody, it's normally on their shoulders. When you have to let somebody go, it's not because they did a poor job necessarily. It's because you, as the entrepreneur, did a poor job, or at least in your head, that's how you see it. And so the psychological thing of basically having to cost somebody their job because you, quote unquote, didn't do a great job running your business and it's having a little bit of a slow period and you're having to let them go, that's even more stressful than having to fire somebody for their own poor performance.
Yeah.
So for me personally, that's even more stressful.
Without a doubt. And I can tell you, you know, probably one of the weaknesses that I've had in business over the years is like waiting too long to do that in a situation where it would be the best thing for the business, because, you know, it's hard to have that conversation with someone that's doing a good job. It isn't their fault. You don't want to let them go. You know, we had that situation with the poker company. I mean, we had 66 employees at one time when at our peak, and you know, and eventually went down to basically zero. And you know, over a period of many years, as that niche declined, and that wasn't any fault of ours. I mean, we didn't really do anything wrong, but it doesn't matter. Like, you're the one that has to have the conversation with them and tell them they have to go find another job. And you know, the reality is that most people live paycheck to paycheck, and they're in a bad spot when you do that. And the thing that's interesting is that like that it's a double-edged sword, and makes me I guess a little bitter about it is maybe the right word, is when it's the other way around. You know, you get very little notice or sympathy, right? It's just like someone comes in and is like, "See you later. Here's my 2 weeks notice," and you stressed about them like every day while they're there, and then it's just like, but they don't realize that, and they're just like, "I'm going to go somewhere else because like the grass is greener on the other side."
Yeah. I've been fortunate not to experience it on that. And most people I've hired have been pretty considerate of the implications for the company. But yeah, it does suck that they're never going to care as much about your company as you care about them.
Yeah. All right. So that was your next one. There was employees. The next one for me is logistics. Is stressful. And some of it's self-induced stress, because I think that we all have this need or desire to be perfect. So you want to, you know, order the exact right amount of inventory, and be in this situation where the day that your container shows up, you have one item left on the shelf, and like the container like shows up at the perfect exact moment, and like there's like this like music in the background, it all goes perfect. That is not the way that it works. So I mean, it's an especially, I don't know if this is a big stress for you as it is for us, because we're dealing with higher volume products. So you can imagine if you have a product that you're selling 50 widgets a day of, the math of how much inventory you need is greatly different than if you have 25 of that widget. And you know, planning for that becomes really difficult, because there's situations where you're selling 50 pretty consistently, and all of a sudden it goes to 25. You know, one of the other stress points I'll talk about here is competition, or just, you know, things out of your control. And so I think that this is one thing that you've done a better job of, Dave, where it probably isn't as much stress for you, because you're just not having to order as many, because you're selling, you know, 1 or 2 of the widget per day, and you're quite happy with that, because that's the niches that you've been going into, and they're higher priced items and probably higher margin. So it probably produces less stress for you.
Yeah, I think it's a ratios game though, because the only difference is that we have a bunch of products, low MOQs, but spread across more products. You have fewer products, but higher MOQs. So I would argue actually in some ways it's more difficult going after the lower demand items because now you're having to plan inventory for more items relative to the sales opposed to fewer items where, yeah, you have more eggs in that one product basket, but you're only having to project inventory for 2 or 3 products instead of maybe 10 or 11 products. If that makes sense.
It does, but I think there's a difference between like additional, like more work and more complexity and stress, right? I mean, I think that for sure, like it definitely, like what your situation is more work. You have more items and more touch points, et cetera. But like, I don't know that I think that actually inherently makes it less stressful because there is no one SKU if you have more that can like really hurt your sales for your company throughout the year versus us. I mean, there's several SKUs that we have that, you know, if they were to go away, that it would definitely make a mark.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look at it that way, and in the fact that it's less diversified with higher demand items, yes, I agree with you on that point. That it's more stressful when you're less diversified in that way.
Yeah. Okay. What's the next one that you have?
Yeah, the next one for me is just kind of the attachment that you have as a business owner. That business is being part of basically you. So if it goes away, you all of a sudden lose kind of a piece of who you are. And I know for me, I think a lot of people kind of see me as Dave, the entrepreneur. And so if your business fails, does that mean that you personally and fail? You know, when you get fired from as an employee, it's not as tied to you from an ego standpoint as a business is for an entrepreneur. So that's always one of the worries with me is that this is one of the worries why I sold my company is that if this business goes bust, well, I've kind of gone bankrupt as an individual, not financially, but just from an ego standpoint.
Yeah.
And so that's the worry that I always have is that, geez, I need to succeed because if I don't succeed from my business, then me personally, I'm not succeeding and people are going to see me as a failure.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of funny because I was going to use this as the last one, kind of almost a little bit funny, but I put EcomCrew on here as one of my stresses because of this exact thing. I mean, we're very public with what we do, and you know, having to come on the podcast and say like that, you know, this, that, or the other didn't work out is definitely a stress point. I mean, I think it's good from one perspective of it, like it lights a fire under my rear end and pushes me to do a really good job. But you know, sometimes that doesn't matter. You know, you can still make poor decisions or things that are out of your control happen that produce a negative outcome, and it definitely produces additional stress.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of why I sold my previous company was so I could basically say, hey, look, I got a win. I got a Stanley Cup, even though it was it was a relatively small scale relative to what a lot of people sell their businesses for. But for me, I seen it as a small win that nobody could take away from me. Was it necessarily the best financial choice when you sell it 3 times a multiple? Maybe not. But for me, in my mind, it gave me a small win that nobody could ever take away. So that's, again, I think one of the byproducts of stress is that maybe you get suckered into making a poor financial choice in terms of selling a company just to get that kind of minor win or a medium win.
Yeah, I mean, and in that situation, you also get to hit the reset button, which I think, just removes a lot of stress, right? I mean, you can take a breather. I think it's good for the body and the soul to just be able to do that, and it produced the ability for you to do some other things for a while before getting into a new business as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm not going to take away from that, especially, again, having a young family allowed me to have some more opportunities with them. But again, I sometimes question how much of it was how much of that decision was made from a financial standpoint, and how much just from a ego standpoint.
All right. Yep. Okay, the next thing for me is tariffs. Something I had not. If you were to ask me these questions a year ago, this would not have been on my list. But we did an episode about this because when Trump was first elected, or right around the election, I think it was even before the election, this concept of a border adjustment tax had been coming up, and that was probably the first time that I had even thought about these types of issues. And I think we did an episode about this a while back. And and then that like went away. Like that whole concept of a border adjustment tax went away with last year's budget when they were going through with that. There was just a lot of pushback on it, and it went away. And then all of a sudden, like just out of the blue, now this trade wars kind of cropped up, and that's definitely stressful to me because it makes it very difficult to plan. Like I don't really know, what the outcome's going to be and how long it's going to last for. I do think eventually it will go away, but in the meantime, it's a high stakes game of poker that I don't even get to play the hand. I just sit back and watch the game develop, right? So that's definitely stressful for me.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember talking to you probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. And you're complaining about Paul Ryan and this border adjustment tax, and you won that one. And what happens? You get basically an even more extreme with Donald Trump and the tariffs. Yeah, funny how the world works.
Yep.
But I agree. I mean, the tariffs are extremely stressful just for the fact that nobody has any idea where it's going, and if you time it wrong, buy a bunch of inventory, get it into the country, and then the next day the tariffs go away, you are at a severe disadvantage.
Yeah, it's definitely. It's tough. So it definitely is. It's definitely stressful. I mean, I honestly, we've talked about it on the podcast before, and I still don't have an answer for how to deal with it, other than it's completely out of our control, and just take it as it comes. And the one of the things we are looking at doing as an alternative is sourcing from other countries. But it might be pretty funny. Like we go source from Vietnam, and that becomes the next country on the list, or something that gets targeted. So I think that all this stuff is fluid. And one of the things I was talking about with our CEO about this the other day is that if it wasn't tariffs, it would be something else. Like that's one thing I've learned from being in business for over 15 years now, is it's always something. Like it doesn't, in the moment, it feels like that's the biggest thing, and this sucks, and I can't believe this is happening. But replace this with that or the other or whatever, because it's always something. It's always going to be something.
Yeah, I think with the tariffs, the only kind of saving grace is that for a lot of people, they probably haven't looked at raising their prices in a long time, and we've been slowly ratcheting up our prices, kind of in anticipation. We haven't actually been hit yet, but just kind of in anticipation of it. And sales have been able to absorb that, basically what works out to 5 to 10% price increase. They've been able to absorb that price increase pretty well without really affecting our sales. So now we're in kind of a win-win. So if the tariffs come along, well, okay, we've adjusted for that. And if the tariffs don't come along, now we're making even more profit margin.
Right.
So sometimes you can turn a negative into a positive, as Daniel the Tiger says.
Nice. Somebody has a young kid in the house. The next stress for me is cash flow. I mean, especially as we continue to grow, the numbers just get bigger. It's like we've added a zero to everything now. It's instead of sending $10,000 wires, or like $100,000 wires, and it's definitely a stress level, right? Of just having to constantly keep all that organized and fully understand the cash flow implications 6 to 12 months out. Something that Jacqueline has been helping with, and hopefully will continue to help with even more. But it is stressful because the number that we see on our tax return that we owe the IRS is disproportionate to the money that's in the bank. That is going to always be an issue as long as we continue to grow at the rate that we have been. And I'll be talking about a little bit more about that in a couple episodes here in the future. We've actually decided to take the pedal off the gas quite a bit because of some of these issues. Just factoring in some of the tariff and sales tax and just some of the other issues that are out there right now, to just put ourselves in a better cash position to weather potential storms. I think is just a prudent thing to do, and not worry about growth as much, but worry about long-term viability.
So you finally listened to me.
No, I'm not going to give you credit for
that. I do think, I think this is kind of an aside, but I think a lot of times for an e-commerce company, once you do take that foot off the pedal, you can really start to see a lot of profits going into your pocket, and it feels great when you stop growing and just start profiting.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we'll be looking at on the radar for the next 12 to however many months or whatever until some of these issues shake out, at least at the minimum.
Yeah, that was my good buddy Paul Lappa over in Beijing says, at some point you have to stop growing the crops and start to harvest them.
Yeah, that's a great saying. I like it. All right, what's the next one on your list?
I'm kind of wrapped up for my list. Do you have anything to add to your list? And if no, maybe we can talk about a couple of strategies, takeaways for dealing with the stress, and how, I don't know, a young entrepreneur could organize their business to minimize stress as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. I have two more. I'll do them quickly so we can add on this other stuff. The first one here is sales tax, just like kind of how that all is playing out. That's definitely a level of stress right now. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that just because we've done several full-length podcasts on that.
I was going to say, if listeners want to review episode 188, 187, 186, 185, they can review all our rants about sales tax.
The thing is, that might actually be true. That might be all those episodes. It feels that way sometimes. And the other one, the last one I had on my list here is competition. That's stressful, just knowing that you aren't the only one out there with Jungle Scout. Right, so there's just constantly people that are finding out about your successful product and I can copy that, and there's not a lot you can do to stop that, and so it's definitely stressful, like having to deal with knowing that that's a constant threat, and we've had a few products that some competitions definitely eat it into our sales, and it sucks because all they did was copy exactly what we've done, and there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I used to sit on a boating board in Vancouver, so basically just a boating industry for Vancouver, and it was all made up of basically brick and mortar marine industry stores, and basically very old school companies were part of the group, and I was like the one e-commerce guy there. And they would all sit there and complain about, e-commerce is taking over our businesses, and all they're doing is copying what we're doing. And they don't see the other side of it where the e-commerce guy is talking about, there's all these Chinese guys ripping off exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. So it's kind of just a circle of life where eventually you get ripped off. And it's not even ripped off. It's just, as the Chinese say, R&D is simply rip off and duplicate. So, I mean, it happens to everybody eventually that, people see success and they want to imitate it. And that's the highest form of flattery is imitation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We had the same thing happen in online poker, so definitely never going to go away. All right, so to kind of follow on to your other point there of ways to cope and deal with the stress, let's talk about some of those things.
Sure. I mean, I'll just kind of speak from my own personal standpoint. Basically, as Mike phrased it, I basically started fresh a year and a half ago, and the big way that I'm learning to kind of manage stress and eliminate it as much as possible. I shouldn't say eliminate because you can never eliminate it, but minimize it is, number one, is I'm thinking very long and hard about any time I add overhead to my company. So there's two ways to do that, primarily hiring staff and getting warehouses and office space. So I'm being very, very tentative about doing any of those two things. I finally actually just hired a full-time BA, and was my first hire, where I think a less mature and knowledgeable Dave Bryant would have hired somebody locally. And I've realized that e-commerce margins are being pushed down continuously year after year, and he with the lowest overhead often wins.
Yep, I think that's definitely wise advice.
Yep. And and the other thing, like I mentioned before, is simply making sure that I don't have more money on the table than I'm prepared to lose. And it's getting close to that point right now, but I'm being very cognizant of it. And if that simply means slowing growth, then I'll do it. I'm not going to be naive and think that my company is going to grow 100, 200% year over year forever. And I'd rather potentially lose some growth and but have a realistic amount of money on the table that I'm prepared to lose, that if things go awry, that I can live at night and live with myself.
Makes sense. I think that's good. For me, I would add a couple other things here. Going on vacation, I think, is important. That can help reduce stress a lot.
You're the guy who's away 4 or 5 months a year on vacation.
Oh my God, I'm going to reach the microphone and strangle you. Going to China to go to the Canton Fair does not count as a vacation.
When you're with me, it does.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know. This is just one of my pet peeves because like this happens back at the office. Like, how was your vacation? Or people they just assume I went to Asia that it was a vacation. It certainly doesn't feel that way. We're over there, although the usual like one drunken night that we have does feel pretty nice.
Yeah, that's the one night not a vacation for me. But no, I get what you're saying. I mean, and the thing is too, even when you're on vacation, if you're in Italy and completely non-work related, you're still getting those messages through your phone and through your email. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. I'm kind of stealing your thunder here talking about this, but that's one thing I've learned is what I think that you're going to talk about is when you're on vacation, actually make it a vacation.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do my best to do that. I mean, I always tell my employees, like, extend me the same courtesy as I extend you when you're on vacation. I very rarely will contact an employee when they're out of the office, whether it's at night during the week when they're here or while they're on vacation, because I want them to be able to have that opportunity to do that. And on the rare times that we do go away and take a vacation, I want the same thing kind of extended to me. Like we have a great team, and I put together an amazing team that is fully capable of running this thing without me. And those are the times where I really want them to be able to do that, and it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah. And anything else that you would add?
Yep. I mean, one thing that I've been doing a lot this year, especially, is just trying to take some time for myself every day if I can. But that is mostly just consisted of, for the last 6 months, it's been after work. I go for like a 3-mile hike. It's been, I mean, first of all, exercise is good. I think that there's been a lot of studies that prove that exercise helps reduce stress. But just getting fresh air, usually go on the hike by myself, just having some time to myself to clear my head. And a lot of times I'll listen to other podcasts that have nothing to do with e-commerce. It's usually travel or other business podcasts or things that I like really enjoy listening to. That it's hard to listen to a podcast like just sitting at home or sitting in the office because you feel like you're going to end up doing something else. So like the doing those hikes and stuff is like a great time to listen to that type of medium. And it's definitely helped a lot for me. Like I look forward to doing it every day if I can. There's definitely some days where I can't, but most every day after work, I go do that. We were just discussing daylight savings times coming up, so it's going to probably have to switch to a different time of the day, probably lunchtime or something is what we're thinking about doing. But I think that it's important to make sure that you have that aspect of your life.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think for me personally, when I'm doing some type of exercise, normally I try to do it in the morning. That's one time I can just kind of disconnect completely from every businessy thing that's going on in my life and just focus on that exercise at hand. And I don't know, just having that hour or two per day really just kind of refreshes you and just resets you a little bit.
Yep, and I try to basically have my phone off when I'm doing that. Even though it's on, like I'm listening to a podcast with it, but I don't look at the messages or the emails. Like anything can wait. It isn't that important to have to deal with it while and there's nothing I can do about it anyway. If I'm in the middle of a hike anyway, like it's if I'm halfway through it, it's just as long to get back either way, right? So yeah, it's definitely it's added a pretty positive aspect to my life over the last many months. Plus, I've lost some weight because of it, so it's good from that too.
Yeah, and I think overall, just kind of following on that point too, one of the things I'm trying to do better is find a time to disconnect, especially with my wife. I've fallen into the trap many times where 9 o'clock at night rolls around and I look at that as prime working time because nobody's really going to bother me.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to lose that and spend that with my wife because our daughter's in bed by that time and really focus on spending some family time and not just always working hour after hour just because it may be convenient.
Yeah, I mean it's a trap. It's a disease. Like I've talked about this in my masterminds. I think that entrepreneurialism can easily be considered a disease just as much as an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever. Yeah. It's just that this is one of these things that these diseases that society has picked as one of these things where you're successful because of it, and it doesn't look at it as a negative. Or like if you have one of these other problems, for whatever reason, I think it's a shame that society kind of looks down on those things. And it's something that I've been working on trying to get just a better balance. It's actually been the topics of my masterminds, like the things that I'm doing in my private community, mastermind with away from EcomCrew and stuff. Those are the things I'm talking about a lot lately. It's just like how to balance that better and not be as obsessive with like the business thing, because it's just so easy to fall in that trap. Like you said, it's 9 o'clock at night, and like the first thing that your mind's going to divert to is that business thing, because it's kind of a disease, right? I mean, it's like and it's what you know and what you feel comfortable with, and it's an easy way to like occupy yourself or get like that dopamine hit of I can go do this and see some results relatively quickly. All these different like factors are at play, but like the long-term repercussions of that is like it's hard on your health and like your physical, personal health, and also like on your relationship health. And those are things that you don't really see happening overnight. So like it's like a slow erosion of that stuff, and something that I've been trying to work on the best that I can, at least.
Yeah, that's actually really profound. I've never actually thought about it that way. I think you're totally dead on. Is that, yeah, it totally is. It's an addiction. And I kind of had actually a revelation as I listened to you talk there that I have to admit it. I'm addicted to entrepreneurialism.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're not alone in that. Like, and again, I mean, it doesn't ever get discussed because you're always kind of patted on the back for it, right? I mean,
working hard.
Yeah. So it's, but at the end of the day, like, I mean, you're not going to think back about that. You're going to think back about the time that you spent with your kid and experiences you were able to create by like going to China for 6 months, or for me, I've been able to go to 49 countries. Those are the things that like I think about, and I want to go to more countries and experience more stuff around the world, or epic hiking trips. And I'm not going to think about that time that I launched a pair of tactical gloves, probably.
Very well said. Well, should we wrap it up on that and
I think
let people ponder whether they have an addiction or not?
Yeah. Well, if you made it this far, let us know. Like, go to the show notes. We'll put that in the closing here with the episode number. But yeah, I'd love to hear what other people, if you're experiencing that as well. I think it's always good to share and commiserate with each other on these types of things. And that's a wrap, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed the 192nd rendition of the EcomCrew podcast. As always, you can go to ecomcrew.com/192 to get to the show notes for this episode. And we'd love to hear from you. You're not alone out there. Running a business, running an e-commerce business can definitely be stressful. It has, as I was saying in the beginning and also through the entire episode, it has its unique challenges, but it's also super rewarding. But yeah, leave some comments. Let us know if you've been feeling these things, or if we missed something. We'd love to hear from you about that as well. Again, as always, I want to thank you guys for your support of the EcomCrew podcast. The best thing you can do to help us is go over to iTunes and leave a review. We really appreciate that. It makes a big difference getting us found. Or just hit subscribe and subscribe to the podcast. Tell a friend. Anything to help us get our numbers up and help us rank a little bit higher. So when people are looking for e-commerce content on iTunes, they find the EcomCrew podcast. So again, thank you guys so much. And until the next episode, happy selling, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the EcomCrew podcast. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/EcomCrew for weekly live recordings of the EcomCrew podcast every Monday. And please do us a favor and leave an honest review on iTunes. It would really help us out. Again, thanks for listening. And until next week, happy selling.